Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is Funeral Service Insider, the podcast from Kates-Boylston. Conversations worth having about the culture and business surrounding end-of-life care. In this episode, we are speaking with Sharon Verbeten. She is one of our regular contributors, so this is, yes, the second contributor in a row, show-wise, but it is more a coincidence than anything else. Sharon, in addition to covering the industry for Funeral Service Insider, actually for American Funeral Director generally, has a day job that is as a librarian, and she has put together this project that helps children and families deal with grief, and she has offered it to her local funeral homes, and I wanted to share it with you to see if it is something that you would find useful and maybe be able to use in your own funeral homes. That's in the second half of the show. And the first half of the show is fun because we talk about covering funeral service. And we'll get to that right after this message from Matthews International. For more than 20 years, Matthews Aurora Funeral Solutions has been providing innovative technology to support funeral professionals and their families. Their Arranger presentation system makes showcasing service and merchandise options simple. Family Connections technology enables families to participate in arrangement planning from the comfort of home. And the Advisor system combines case management and interactive planning, all in one place. Simplify the arrangement process with technology designed for you. Visit MatthewsAurora.com for a free demo or call 1-800-457-111 today. That's MatthewsAurora.com or 1-800-457-1111. Call today. So you actually have been writing for Kates-Boylston much longer than I have, which, I mean, that's not a huge thing. I've only been doing it for 3 years, but I would love to hear your story, and I'm sure the listeners would too, of how you got to start writing in funeral service generally, and then at Kates-Boylston specifically.
Yeah, I've been with Kates-Boylston now for decades, honestly, just kind of fell into them, but how I got into the funeral industry is actually more of an interesting story. This was in the 90s, late 90s, early 90s rather. I answered a blind ad in the newspaper. Remember, they used to have ads in the newspaper for jobs, and they were looking for a creative writer. And I happened to be a writer looking for gigs, and answered a blind ad. It asked me to write a couple paragraphs on any topic of my choice just to show my creative writing technique. And actually, I remember what I wrote about. I wrote about the polar plunge. Do you know what the polar plunge is?
Yes.
Because I was in Wisconsin, and that was a big thing on January 1st, jumping into the freezing lake. Wrote a creative piece on that. A couple days later, an editor called me and said she loved my writing. Could I come in for an interview? And it was with the National Funeral Directors Association in Milwaukee, which is where I was living at the time.
I'm sorry, I want to interrupt you with my own story because it's fascinating. I answered a blind ad as well. It's like either they don't want to attract a certain type of person to the funeral industry, or they don't want to scare people away. But it was very much like when I started, it was like, do you have any problem writing about funerals in the funeral industry? And I'm like, no, why would I? It's weird to hear that the NFDA did that as well, that it wasn't just Kates-Boylston. And it's, I guess, also weird that it continues because there's, I guess, a taboo.
Well, I agree with you. I believe that, perhaps if they would have advertised that it was for the funeral industry, that people would have shied away, or they would have thought it was weird, or they would have thought it was morbid or something.
Yeah.
And I mean, well, we know, or
they would have gotten 1,000 Edgar Allan Poes,
But, it's interesting. And I didn't know that was your situation as well. But
yeah.
The position was for assistant editor at the Director magazine for NFDA. This was the early 90s. So met with the editor and loved the editor from the start, and we got along well. And I only worked there for a few months. There were, various reasons for my departure, but I mean, the biggest takeaway from that job was how much I love the industry, meeting the people and interviewing the people and learning about the industry and the good people that are working there. So I kept in touch with the former editor and went on to do many other things in the funeral industry. Wrote for a now defunct publication called Mortuary Management.
Mm.
Did that and then kind of fell into American Funeral Director, found them and never looked back. Have had a great relationship with them for decades.
Just to be clear then, like me, you had zero knowledge of, except for whatever personal knowledge you had of funerals. You didn't know that there was really such a thing as the funeral industry, certainly before you started writing in it, or certainly as deep as it was before you started writing.
Yeah, no, that's correct. I mean, I had zero knowledge of the funeral industry when I started there. And people always, I got a lot of this throughout my early years writing for the funeral industry, is that people would ask me, they're like, well, are you a funeral director? Do you know anything about the industry? And they're like, I don't think you're going to be the right one to write this story. And I would always say, this is why I'm the perfect person to write this story, because I don't know what I don't know. And I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask a lot of questions. And you're going to clarify for me so that I do get the information correct.
Yeah, I think that, and I know what the world needs is one more guy saying how hard it is to be a writer and misunderstood and all that. But there is this sense that people, I think, forget that storytelling is a job in itself. It's something that if you're good at it, the telling of the story is what is important. And not that the subject matter is secondary, but the subject matter is the context, and the details are the details, and those are two different things. And it's just, again, they're always afraid that you're going to, focus on the wrong thing, but it's a reflection of what did they focus on? Like what are you going to tell me? Because that's what I'm going to write about. I'm not going to make up extra stuff to write about. You know what I mean?
And I'm going to ask the right questions, because I have written in the trade industry for many years, and not just the funeral trade, but I've written in the healthcare trade and the library trade. I even, for quite some time, wrote for magazines in the waste management industry. And, these were people they were driving septic trucks, and they were pumping out septic tanks, and they were, in the garbage waste management industry. And they were very proud of what they did, rightfully so, but they wanted to know, how could I share their story? And so I think it's just, as you say, it's telling a story, it's asking the right questions, and it's putting it in a context so that people not in the industry can understand.
And also that people in the industry are still informed. So it's a tough trick, but it's one that can be done if you're a professional writer.
Well, and hopefully, Tony, that there will still be professional writers after AI, right? I mean, always a concern that real people, real interviews, real quotes, that kind of thing. I think hopefully our jobs are secure.
I feel like they are, and I know that this might sound naive and maybe a little starry-eyed, but I'm enthusiastic about AI because AI will separate. I think it'll cause a greater separation. Right now, everybody's mediocre, and good stands out in a way that it didn't used to before. Like, because one of the things that you and I do that not everybody can do, although like with spell check, everybody became a writer.
Yes.
But now with this next evolution of spell check, originality is the thing that is the differentiator. Like, do you know how a story goes? Do you know the beats? Do you know the language, and can you take something that might not be interesting and make it interesting? And that a bad writer can't do with AI anymore, but a good writer could,
I appreciate that perspective. I think too, what I try to look for in my writing, at least the stuff that I've done for American Funeral Director, is really get some great quotes from the source to begin with. And usually they always ask me, do you have a list of questions you can send me before the interview? And I never do. A, because I don't want them to know what I'm going to ask before I ask it. I like the element of surprise. And B, because I kind of operate from, we're going to let this interview go organically, right? And you may say something that takes me in a different direction, and I don't want to be tied to a list of questions. And I also find, I don't know if you find this, Tony, but when when I interview somebody, if I send them the questions a couple days before, they're going to craft the perfect answer, right? And I want to hear off the cuff what they have to say.
Well, because it's boring and stale. And that's one of the things that it's hard to communicate. And again, I don't want to get too precious about it, but what I want to say is I'm the writer, right? So if you're going to tell the story, then you don't need me. But I'm going to tell you that the story you tell isn't going to be interesting to anyone but you. And one of the things that I like to let people know is that they're the expert on them. And I'm only going to ask them questions about them. I'm not going to catch them off guard with questions about who are you and what do you think about this,
Right. And I think, you make some good points that, they're the experts. We are the writers. And there's a big difference. I mean, there's definitely a different school of thought with some publications where I've written for publications where the source does not get to read the article before it is published, and ones where they do. And I always find that if you do let the source read the article before it's published, they're going to want to clean it up, and they're going to want their quotes to sound different, and they're going to want to make themselves sound better. And it does not come off as organic as it is.
Yes, actually, I've worked for a couple papers like that, but the one that I liked the best, it wasn't a paper, it was a pay-to-play magazine, was I could pull my byline off at least. And that was the best part. I'm like, all right, that is just too awful to, and I could pull my byline, and then, I got paid anyway, so.
People not in journalism don't necessarily understand that, why should I let you write the story? How do I have to approve what you're writing? It's like, no, you have to have some faith in the fourth institution here. But
yeah.
Frighteningly, I don't know how strong our fourth institution is anymore, but.
Yeah, no, that's obviously something that we struggle with. But the other thing that I would like you to talk about for a moment, because one of the things that when I first started, there were, people were like, what are you going to write about every week? And well, there's no lack of stories.
There is never a lack of stories. Having written in the trades, when you do an interview and you learn something about somebody, it may lead you in a direction that you weren't initially going for. So one example is I interviewed, I think it was a funeral director one time, and I think he had a hobby of collecting and playing accordions. And I just so happened to also be writing in the antiques world at the time. And so then I turned that into another story for that publication about his accordion collection. So it's about listening, and it's about finding the kernel of interest and maybe surprise too.
Right.
In what you're doing. People are interesting. I mean, I think there's been very few people, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, if this has happened to you. I mean, there have been interviews that I've done and I'm like, oh my God, this didn't turn out well. This person's not super interesting, but you might have to take a different approach kind of thing, or poke and prod a little more to get the story, right?
Well, that's why I talk so much, because a lot of times I'll get the yes and no guy, and I'm like, well, I'm going to keep talking. I'm going to keep you on the phone until you say something I can write.
Yeah, I mean, I think, maybe people are a little more closed off or they're nervous, but I think if we're good journalists, we know how to get those stories, and we've been doing it long enough that we know how to find that. And, even in our industry, there may be, there's certainly some delicate topics, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I interviewed a woman fairly recently. Right now, what I focus on for American Funeral Director are books that people have written about death, grief, loss. And I interviewed a woman whose mother had passed away. And then a few years later, she lost her father. And it was kind of her memoir. And I mean, it was definitely a delicate balance because it was so emotional for her. But I think she was really grateful that, somebody wanted to share her story. She wrote a book about it. So she wanted people to know and feel her grief. And, but again, stepping lightly is always important on these topics.
Hi, I want to take a second to talk to you about the Kates-Boylston virtual and in-person event program, predilection, policy. we like to have events, and it's not really just because we like the get-together aspect of it. There are some times when it just makes more sense to put you directly in contact with the expert with no filter or very little filter, as we've been talking about in this last episode just now. When you go to a Kates-Boylston event, whether it's virtual or in person, you will have people like me kind of directing the conversation, but you'll have the opportunity to hear experts talk about their expertise and speak directly to you about it. You'll also have the opportunity to ask them questions, whether again it's in person or virtually. There's always a chance to ask about more things. What I'd like to bring your attention to is our archives page as well as our upcoming events. So if you go to events.katesboylston.com, you'll see several of our upcoming in-person and virtual events, and you can see which ones fit you if you have a job in the funeral industry. If you have listened to this podcast for the last 15 or so minutes, then there is something there that you need to know about or would be improved by knowing about. The in-person events usually have a cost. The not in-person events are always free, and they're also mostly permanent. So if you scroll down past the upcoming events, you'll get to a section of the page that says previous events. And in those previous events, you'll find the webinars we've done recently, and you can click on them and still watch them. And I'll tell you what, they also have opportunities for you to contact the speakers. So if you come up with a question while you're watching a webinar or a virtual event that we recorded last month, the month before 2023, you'll be able to get in touch with the speaker at the end and ask them questions. And they love to get questions and are happy to provide answers. Two that I want to point out that I think are real special. The first is our pre-need seminar that we just held in the last week or so. It featured Greg Norris of Homesteaders and Spencer Larkin of Envision Strategic Partners. That webinar went really, really well, and there's still lots of good, fresh information there. Take a look at it. Anyway, everything that I've mentioned here you can find in the show notes and click through. But if you just want to remember the web URL, it is events.kates-boylston.com, and that will bring you everything that we have done in the recent past. Let's get back to the show. I want to make sure that we talk about Comfort Kids. So let's talk about Comfort Kids now. And then if there's time later, we can talk about my other goofy questions I have about writing, because I could talk about writing all day. I saw you in the newspaper, and it's always weird to see a colleague in the newspaper for other reasons. And you started this project. So your day job is you're a librarian, or is that just all right?
I'm a children's librarian, have been for many years. That's my day job. And but for 14 years, I was a part-time librarian. So in my other part-time, that was when I was freelancing, whether it be for the funeral industry or the library industry, or really anyone I could write for. But now that I'm full-time, I still do some writing, but I have narrowed my scope to only freelance for the funeral industry now because it is something I'm very passionate about.
And you started this project at your own library that has expanded called Comfort Kids. Can you talk a little bit about your idea behind starting Comfort Kids and what it is?
So I'm in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and there was a fund called the Canary Fund that regularly offers seed grants of $5,000 or less to individuals or nonprofits that are looking to, do something beneficial for either the underserved communities or the forgotten or something that's really been overlooked. And in my opinion, both as a librarian, as an attendee at funerals, as a person in the funeral industry, I often feel that children get left behind. Parents are afraid to approach the topic of death. They are nervous about bringing children to funerals. And I really wanted to normalize and destigmatize death, loss, grief, and funerals for children and families. So I applied to the Canary Fund. I received a $2,000 grant late last year to create comfort kits. And what these kits are kits for libraries, 10 to 12 books, some emotion puppets, and children and their families can check these out. From the libraries, I have 2 libraries in my area in Wisconsin that I donated those to, and 3 funeral homes that I created comfort kits for. The difference is that the comfort kits for the funeral homes contain the books, but they also contain consumables that they can give to the families to take home and keep. And those include wildflower seeds that they can plant in memory of their loved one, blank journals and crayons that the child can get their emotions out in the blank journals, and a small handmade stuffed animal, handmade by a woman here in Green Bay, either a small cloud or a small heart that they can use as a comfort piece in memory of their loved one.
It's interesting because I've seen from your writing, and we also have someone else, I believe, an American funeral director who does grief books for children as well. And it's interesting to think of funeral homes as having libraries, and I don't know if it's as common as it could be. Do you find that there are many that don't have these kind of grief resource libraries anymore, or is it something that you feel like is on the rise?
I agree that it's not as prevalent as it should be. I think that having an active, maybe not active, but at least having a grief library with up-to-date resources in your funeral home is essential to serving your families. Whether or not the funeral home offers an aftercare program, it's just something that if the family brings a child to a funeral, these are resources for them to look at, for them to enjoy, to educate, to normalize bringing children to funeral homes. And let's face it, parents are often not comfortable addressing death with their children. So, let's say a grandparent dies. How many families do we know would say, well, grandpa's sleeping or grandpa went away? And
Right.
we need honesty. I mean, we need honesty to normalize and destigmatize. And there's so many good children's books out there now that do that in a way that's gentle and understanding and does not create fear in children. So let's do this. The funeral homes I gave the books to, the 3 funeral homes that I offered these comfort kits to had nothing in the way of offering children something like this. So they were very grateful to have this resource.
And have they found it useful? I know this is newish, but have you gotten any feedback about, they have families and they were able to use them
I
effectively?
delivered the kits just a few months ago, so I haven't followed up just yet. That's going to be part of my grant process is, following up with the people. Um, I know that one of the funeral homes that I did give the comfort kits to asked me to come in and update their adult grief library.
Oh,
And they had, and the caveat is they had a bookshelf with books on it that had, had about an inch of dust on them, and honestly had books from the 1970s and 80s on that shelf. So I asked them if they could give me funding to update the adult grief books. And so, out of their funeral home budget, they gave me about $200, and I did purchase new books, for the adult library. Now, whether or not they use them, obviously that's on them, but
so this is why I don't submit my questions in advance, because now I got your question for you.
no.
Okay. You have $200. What is the best adult library you can build with $200?
Well,
for grief library?
So what I did was I tried to hit on topics that I thought were going to be important in the funeral home. One of my favorite authors in the industry is Alan Wolfelt. I think he has some excellent, not only books, but also some workbooks for families dealing with grief with teens, with youth, with adults. So I did go to that author. And I also put some books in the libraries that dealt with loss after suicide, losing a loved one after an illness, lengthy illness. There are different types of loss. Obviously, the
Right.
loss of somebody to suicide hits a little bit differently than somebody who's struggled for years with cancer. It's still a loss, of course. But so finding those topics, and that's how I went about it as a librarian. And it was also very important to me to find books that had been published within the last 5 to 10 years.
And so if someone wants to start a grief library, they shouldn't be looking for old books. They should be looking for newish, anything in the last couple of years that has come out.
I mean, absolutely. And this is a sad situation. One of the books I found at one of the libraries that I that I went through one of the funeral home libraries is that when I pulled the books off the shelf, there was a book about lost to SIDS, but it was from the 1980s.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, things have changed quite a bit, right?
Mm.
So these books are not going to be useful. Books on honoring, perhaps, somebody who was in the military, how do you date? One of the books that was very important too are like, there's a lot of books out there, like 365 Days of Dealing with Your Grief. I love those books because they give people a little bit at a time to help them work through things.
Right.
Um,
Actionable.
which I
But
think is super important than trying to tackle your grief head on, right? I think you can't just go on Amazon and just like Google death and grief.
right.
Pick the first thing that comes out. I mean, obviously, as a librarian, I have experience in collection development, but your funeral home, and your families, and what topics there are. But I think having newer resources is really important.
And as far as if a funeral home wants to develop their own comfort kits, what makes sense for them? Or is this something that you're going to be able to template that people can just look at your template and copy it? Well, what can funeral directors take away from your experience?
Well, there are some companies online that have similar type templates. I mean, there are some companies that offer like, here's a kit about cancer, dealing with cancer. Here's a
Right.
kit, so it's not, something that they couldn't purchase. However, I think self-curating something absolutely could be done at the funeral home. If somebody has an aftercare person who is dealing with families and knows what the families are asking for. I mean, families might be vocal. My child can't sleep at night. Is there something, is there a book they could, or help them understand the loss of grandma or grandpa? They could curate one on their own, certainly. And I would advocate for them contacting their local library. Honestly, the librarian would be happy when people come into my library. And now I have two kits. I have loss of a loved one and I have a loss of a pet kit as well, because that's a huge thing for kids too.
We actually we just lost our dog, and our grandchildren weren't yeah, it was that was their first, thing that died kind of, and they
Yes.
it was very complex. I mean, I like to think I have a very healthy relationship with death, so it's not as if I had trouble speaking with them about it, but you could see that it wasn't getting through in any kind of like meaningful way. Like, all right, well, the dog is gone now and the dog's not coming back now, and we took her to a place where they turned her, her bones into dust. And then, we brought them back, and, they
Yeah.
get it, but that's all they're going to get. But for better or for worse, that's not the first death they're going to experience. So they'll get a little practice, I guess.
But it's often the first death that kids
Yeah.
experience, and it should not be treated lightly. And, kids have strong bonds with pets. There are some beautiful, beautiful books out about the relationship between a child and a pet, and when that pet goes away, and some really, really beautiful books out there, that I would think most public libraries would have some books in their picture book section about the loss of pets, and those would be something that funeral homes could use as well.
And we are kind of coming up against it a little bit here. So before we get too close to the edge, I want to ask you, is there something I should have asked you and didn't, or something you thought you'd get the opportunity to say, but I didn't provide it? Or what would you have asked you?
No, I just super appreciate that, I hope we're seeing a tide turn of families being more engaged with their children, and being more honest. But, we may not be right there. I'm hoping my comfort kits are just a tiny little thing. Yeah, I just think, I mean, I really hope that what I'm doing with these kits is just, can hopefully be replicated in other places for people to understand the importance of addressing death and loss with children.
And there's no good reason for anybody to not have at least some death library, grief library that they can at least gesture toward to make families feel a little bit more comfortable.
I mean, it's not, necessarily, I mean, I consider it a value added, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if, the family comes in, you have something to offer them. If you want to give them the book to take home and keep forever, great. I mean, most books are $20 to $30. it's a well worth it, in my opinion, to give that to a family.
Excellent. And now I'm also going to put you on the spot. Do you know what you have coming up next? Are you working on anything for American Funeral Director as we speak?
I have two things I'm working on. There's a new book out called Playing Possum: How Animals Understand Death.
That's
It's
great.
kind of a fascinating book I'm reading right now. And also I am working on the White House Mourning Collection. They have a historical display of mourning artifacts. And so I'm doing some research into that.
Excellent. And just because this is going to come out very close to summer, I'm going to also say that this summer I'm going to read All the Living and the Dead, which I had not come across
Yes,
before.
it's amazing.
But that's apparently a one that I like. Not strangers, when friends of mine found out I had this job, they're like, well, you read All the Living and the Dead, right? And I'm like, no, I didn't yet. I'll get to it.
I
So
mean,
that's my summer reading.
yeah, that's an amazing book. And of course, always rereading the books of Caitlin Doughty, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, and Will the Cat Eat My Eyeball? She's hilarious, very goth funeral director from Los Angeles, who is, I don't know if you're familiar with her works, but
Yes.
love her stuff.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story.
Thank you, Tony. It's been fun.
For more than 20 years, Matthews Aurora Funeral Solutions has been providing innovative technology to support funeral professionals and their families. Their Arranger presentation system makes showcasing service and merchandise options simple. Family Connections technology enables families to participate in arrangement planning from the comfort of home. And the Advisor system combines case management and interactive planning, all in one place. Simplify the arrangement process with technology designed for you. Visit MatthewsAurora.com for a free demo or call 1-800-457-111 today. That's MatthewsAurora.com or 1-800-457-1111. Call today. That will do it for this week. Funeral Service Insider is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. If you would like to send feedback, you can follow a link in the show notes, which will take you to the website where you can click on my little email icon. Send me anything you like. You also can call. You can leave a voicemail at 732-746-0233, extension 709. That is 732-746-0233, extension 709. Please tell me whether or not you want me to use what you say on the voicemail, because I won't use it if you don't want me to, and if you do, I'd be happy to. And that will do it for this week. We will check in with you next time on Funeral Service Insider, the podcast.